friends, welcome back to my Practically Imperfect Life. Today we're going to do 2 more recipe tutorials. These are things that we are making for Christmas events here in our household. One of them is a recipe that can be found in my Christmas Around the World Part 2 unit study when you study the country of France, and it is a Christmas Yule log or a Bûche de Noël. It's a cake very similar to like a Swiss cake roll, like a lightweight cake with a whipped cream filling and a ganache on top that is designed to look like the Christmas Yule log, which is a long-standing tradition in European countries, or many European countries. So we're going to be making that recipe first. Now the other thing I'm going to be making is what I call construction grade gingerbread. So this is not gingerbread that you're going to eat. It doesn't really contain much in the way of sugar, so it doesn't taste good if you eat it, but it is fantastic if you are making gingerbread houses or other gingerbread structures. So I'm making a batch of that because one, my daughter would like to decorate a gingerbread house, and second, I want to create some flat gingerbread pieces that I'm then going to put together to make a centerpiece for our Christmas table. So I'm going to be making all of that gingerbread today, and then in another video I will actually decorate and create that centerpiece and get my whole Christmas table ready for our entertaining on Christmas Day. But let's start with the Yule log cake. Now it does require a little bit extra time because you have to make the cake, make the filling, and make the ganache frosting. But it's actually a lot simpler than I think people think when they first look at the ingredients list and they look at the instructions. So a couple things that you're going to need. You're going to need 4 eggs, and you're going to want to go ahead and separate them into the yolks and into the whites. You're going to need half a cup of sugar, some unsweetened cocoa powder. Now I have a strong preference because I'm a baker for the Ghirardelli brand. If you're looking for something you can buy in the store. So this is what I use for my things. And then you're gonna need cake flour. Now, if you absolutely do not have cake flour, you could probably use regular flour, but you are gonna wanna sift it rather fine. Cake flour is just designed for those cakes that you need to have much lighter, springier cake texture too. So I would recommend if you can get a small bag of cake flour to do so, but if you absolutely don't want to spend the money on just cake flour for a few recipes, go ahead and try your regular flour. You're going to need some instant coffee granules. So I always keep a little container of instant espresso around. This is something that I use when I'm doing anything with chocolate and anytime I'm baking with chocolate, because adding in just a little bit of instant coffee, it does not add a coffee flavor. What it does is it enhances the chocolate flavor in your cake. So I just keep a can of this around for anytime I'm baking with chocolate. You need baking powder, you need salt, and then you are going to want to have some extra cocoa powder on hand for dusting after the cake comes out. So those are the ingredients for our cake. We will get into the ingredients for the filling and the ganache as we get to it, but we're going to start off with the process of the cake itself. Now we are going to be mixing things up into several different bowls, so I'll kind of show you what I'm doing with each bowl and how we're putting it all together. Another thing you're going to want to have is a jelly roll pan. Now a jelly roll pan is just a fancy way of saying a baking sheet that has a lip. So this is an 11 by 17, or you can do a 12 by 18, but you just need some sort of a baking pan that does have a lip to it. You want a piece of parchment cut to fit, because you do want your parchment to be flat, because this is where we're going to spread our cake batter out onto, and we're going to need to be able to dump it out of there afterwards. So get yourself one of these. Go ahead and get your parchment cut. In fact, that's probably the part that took me the longest, was just cutting the parchment to exactly fit my baking pan. But have that ready to go, and then get your oven preheating to 425 degrees. So let's go ahead and start mixing up our different bowls of ingredients and show you how this cake batter comes together.
With a hand mixer, I'm just going to mix the egg whites until they form soft peaks. So in other words, when you pull the beaters out of the egg white mixture, you should have little peaks that form and then kind of curve back over. And then I'm going to go back over and start mixing up the second half of my batter. I've got my egg yolks, and to those 4 egg yolks, I'm going to add half a cup of sugar, and I'm going to whisk them together until they start to lighten up in color. So you can see here it starts to form kind of this pale yellow color.
So now that the egg yolks and sugar are a nice light color, I have sifted my dry ingredients into a separate bowl. So in here I have 1/4 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder, 1/3 cup of the cake flour, half a teaspoon of the coffee granules, a teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So it's just been sifted together so it's all nice and lightweight. We're going to add all of this into here, mix it together. It is going to be a very, very thick batter at this point. so we're going to lighten up this batter with our egg whites. We're going to add in the first half of the egg whites and just kind of fold them in with the spatula. And then we're going to add the second half in, and that half we need to add a little more carefully because we don't want to get rid of all of this lovely air that we've worked into our egg whites. Try not to make too much of a mess while doing this. So what we're doing here is more of a folding in motion versus a stirring motion. So you can see I'm just going to use my spatula and I'm going to keep folding the batter onto itself until those egg whites are incorporated into the batter. And I'm not being super gentle, but I'm not being like crazy with my mixing. But you can see now it's getting incorporated into there, and see how much thinner that batter is. Now the second half we want to fold in very gently because we don't want to get rid of all of that air we've added to the batter. And the chemistry geek in me is always amazed how fluffy 4 egg whites can get. I always think that that is just crazy. Now this I'm going to fold in much more gently because I want this batter to be nice and light and airy. But I still do need the egg whites to be incorporated. Like, you don't want streaks of egg white in your batter. You do want it to be fully incorporated. You just want to be much gentler in how you are adding it in. Okay, so you can see how much lighter this batter is. Now I'm going to pour this into my jelly roll pan pretty carefully, and I'm going to smooth it out very gently with the spatula because, again, I don't want to get rid of all of this air that I've now incorporated into this cake. And it's going to go into the oven for 6 to 7 minutes or until it springs back a little bit when you gently press down on the cake.
After about 6 minutes, I pulled the cake out of the oven, and you can see that I'm just checking it to make sure it's springing back. I let it cool in the pan for about 3 minutes and then flipped it onto a tea towel that had been dusted with cocoa powder, and I'm going to very gently peel back the parchment, just trying to make sure I'm not really pulling much off of the cake there. And then from the short end of the cake, I'm going to roll the cake up very gently and slowly along with the tea towel because I don't want to crack or break the cake, but I want to get it all rolled up, and I'm going to let it cool like this within the towel until fully cooled.
All right, while our cake is cooling, we're going to go ahead and start on our ganache frosting because that will take a little bit of time to cool to a point where we can frost it on our cake. So you need 6 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate to start. You can use bar chocolate, you can use chocolate chips. Doesn't matter. I actually had about 1 ounce left of bar semi-sweet chocolate, so I chopped that up and then I added chocolate chips till I got to 6 ounces. And then you're going to need 3/4 cup of heavy whipping cream. Now this you're going to want to heat up until it's bubbling but not boiling, so until it just starts to bubble. It's very quick where it goes from just being hot enough to boiling and scalding the milk. So it's much easier to control that temperature if you do this in a saucepan on the stove versus if you try to microwave it. So I highly recommend go ahead and get that saucepan out and do it over the stove. You'll just be able to control that temperature much better. So we're gonna get this heating up, and then once it's at temperature, we're gonna pour it over the top of our chocolate, let it sit for a couple of minutes so it can start to melt that chocolate, and then get it all stirred together. And we'll show you what that all looks like.
For the filling, you're going to need a cup of heavy whipping cream, 1/4 cup of powdered sugar, and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Just mix them in a stand mixer with a whisk attachment until it's thick like frosting. Now it is time to assemble all of these pieces together. So I'm going to take my cooled cake and I'm going to gently unroll it all the way. And then once I have it all unrolled, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my filling out from the fridge. I stored it in the fridge until I was sure that the cake was fully cooled. I'm going to spread it out over the cake, leaving about maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch of a border because I don't want that filling coming, flying out the sides of my cake when I roll it up. And then we're going to roll it back up, this time without the towel, and again, very gently to make sure that we're not cracking our cake. And we're going to place it on whatever serving tray you'd like to use with the seam side down. Now, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to cut about a 2.5 inch piece at an angle off one end, and I'm going to put the cut side facing out on the side of my cake. So I have like a branching Yule log. So I'm just kind of pressing it up there. Don't worry, it's all gonna stay together when we ganache it. Just trying to figure out exactly where I want to place it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut on the other end of my cake just to give it a nice clean look at the end. And then I promptly handed the piece I cut off to my daughter, who's sitting off screen and wanted to try some ahead of time. And then from here, now it's time to ganache our cake. So I had the ganache filling sitting in the fridge for probably about 45 minutes thickening up, because you saw how thin it was when I first mixed it together. So now it's more like a frosting consistency. I'm going to spread it over all parts of the cake except for the cut ends. I want to leave those exposed so that way we can see them. And I'm just going to, try to get it somewhat smooth. I mean, we're making a log, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And then I used a fork to create this bark effect on the cake. Now, you could serve it like this, or you could add cranberries, you could make marzipan leaves, you could add little mushrooms, but I think we're just going to dust it with powdered sugar and enjoy. Now it's time to make our gingerbread. I'm going to start with 28 ounces of all-purpose flour, and to that I'm going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 of a teaspoon of ginger, 1/2 a teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/4 of a teaspoon of cloves, and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Now, do you need to add necessarily all of these spices? No, but I find that it really just makes your gingerbread smell amazing. And I can sift them together, or I can just whisk them together. I always found that just whisking them together works just fine. Now I'm going to set my dry ingredients aside. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my stand mixer. I'm going to start off with my stand mixer having the whisk attachment on. I'm going to put 6 ounces of sugar in there, which is about 3/4 of a cup. And then I have 7 ounces of vegetable shortening. Now I weigh out the vegetable shortening while it's still solid, and then I melt it in the microwave till it's melted but not hot. I also added in 16 ounces of molasses, mix it for a bit, and then add in an egg and mix a bit more. Once it's all kind of incorporated together, I'm going to switch out my whisk attachment for my paddle attachment. Once the paddle attachment's on, I add all of the dry ingredients all at once, and I'm going to mix it on a low speed so that way, flour doesn't go flying all over my kitchen. And it'll start off looking kind of dry and crumbly, but it does come all together. It will mix and it'll form a nice dough. So you'll see it all kind of pull off from the sides here and sort of attach itself to the paddle attachment. To roll it out, I'm going to take 2 sheets of parchment and just take a portion of my dough and roll it out till it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. I like to place it like this on a cookie sheet and pop it in the fridge for maybe 20 minutes or so. I find that makes it so my templates don't stick to the dough, and I get much cleaner cuts when I'm cutting out my different shapes. Once I have my shapes cut out, I'm going to put it in a 300-degree oven. Now the recipe calls for 50 to 60 minutes of baking time. I have a convection oven, so I really only needed 40 minutes to get to this point. Once this is all cool, we can assemble our gingerbread house, and if you want to see how I'm going to use the extra pieces to make a holiday centerpiece, check out my next video. See you guys in the next one, and Merry Christmas!